My project was called Unstandardized Students. My thesis focused on gender stereotypes in the classroom and how those stereotypes influence teaching strategies and teachers and how they treat their students. And my purpose in writing the thesis is to show that students are more than their stereotypes, and that instead of looking at students from a gender perspective or a racial perspective or as a binary thing that can be categorized, they should be looked at overall as individuals. And in order to do so, our education needs to change in order to encompass those changes in stereotypes. Currently in the world, we have something called a boy crisis in literacy. And what that boy crisis is talking about is a large gender gap between boys and girls in literature classrooms and English classrooms. In reality, there are a few facts about this crisis that aren't really shed light upon. In 1972, students were tested in Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States. And ever since then, their test scores in literature have been rising. Girls in 1972 were also tested in Australia, the United States, and the United Kingdom, and their test scores were also rising. The real crisis here is we live in a patriarchal society and our education system is based on patriarchal values. So despite the fact that there are gender gaps in computer science, math, physics, biology, and chemistry, where boys are outperforming girls, the fact that girls are outperforming boys in literature is the true crisis. A few stereotypes that are implemented in classrooms today to help boys bridge that gender gap are as follows. Number one, boys develop fine motor skills later in life than girls, and therefore they have poorer handwriting when they begin writing. And because boys are focusing more on how they write rather than what they're writing, they have a more difficult time understanding texts and literature because they can't figure out how to write it. Boys are also kinesthetic learners. Further than that, the fact that women are trying to feminize boys by sitting them in seats and making them sit still for an hour is not helping their learning because it's making them uncomfortable, it's making them distressed, and they have too much energy, it's bubbling up, and it's causing disruptive behavioral problems. Also, boys are very literal. They don't understand figurative language, and therefore girls should be asked the figurative language questions, and boys should simply be asked to find information out of texts. And finally, boys have been taught to be stoic since very young ages, and when they're asked to analyze their own emotions or the emotions of another character, it's difficult for them because they've never been taught to express their emotions. So in the same respect, girls should also be asked to analyze the emotional parts of stories, and boys should just be asked about information. Now, the problem with these stereotypes is, number one, it assumes that all of those things are true for all boys, and it also assumes that none of those things are true for girls. In reality, both boys and girls learn differently, and differently from each other. Every student has a different level of development. Students develop at different rates, and at any given time during their education, students are going to be at different developmental stages in their life. Second, the standardized tests that students take in order to measure their writing ability and their literature ability are often biased. The ACT and the SAT only ask for one type of writing sample, and that's an argumentative or a persuasive essay. Well, some students are very good at writing argumentative or persuasive essays. Some students are not. That doesn't mean they're bad writers. Their strengths lie in literary fiction or informational texts or genre fiction. But yet, when they take these tests, they're being labeled as poor writers simply because they cannot write that one type of essay. Also, the definition of literacy in this country is very exact. Literary fiction. Literacy is the ability to read and comprehend literary fiction. What that doesn't include is every other type of literature. Informational text, genre literature like sci-fi, fantasy, romances, westerns, graphic novels and comics, online forums like chat rooms and social networking sites, manuals to build computers, and newspapers and magazine articles. What students are reading today are all of these things, but yet it's not a part of our literacy. Some things that we need to do in order to close the gender gaps, in order to eliminate the stereotypes, and in order to create lifelong learners are, number one, to include incorporate technology into the classroom. Personal readers are a great tool to use because no one can see the cover of the book that you're reading. So whether your book is labeled nerdy or girly, nobody's going to know except for you. Laptops and tablets are also great tools to use. Many times in lectures, students are listening to a teacher or a professor or another student speak, and they use a word that they don't understand. Laptops and tablets make it easy for that student to quickly look up the word. Now they're back on track with the lesson, and they're not focusing on the fact, oh, I don't understand that. Now I can't focus on the lesson because I'm focused on the fact that I don't understand, and I'm dumb because I don't know what this word means. Another important aspect is the idea of owning your education. A personalized curriculum means that a student's interests follow the state-mandated curriculum. They're still accomplishing the same tasks, the same requirements, but it's based on their interests and their ideas. For example, the use of webcams in a classroom would allow students, say, taking a world literature class who are interested in Japanese manga, instead of learning about the Russian literature and the African literature that their class is focusing on, they can sit in front of a computer and watch a lecture from another state, another country, another school about Japanese manga, but still fulfill the world literature requirement that they're required to have. What's an advantage about this is the student is now interested in what they're learning, and therefore they're more motivated to do more with that subject. Right along the lines of this are online classes, and what's great about online classes is students can move at their own pace. Typically, the pace in a classroom is the pace of the slowest student. So the students who are very quick to pick up things move quickly and are forced to wait for the students who are behind them to catch up. And that's frustrating, and it's embarrassing for the students who are slower because they know that they are holding up the other members in the class. Online classes would eliminate that because students can now move at their own pace and accomplish tasks as they're ready to. The bottom line is that students cannot be categorized in whether it's gender stereotypes, racial stereotypes, social or economic stereotypes, because students are not the same. There are different backgrounds, different experiences, different health issues, all sorts of things that make up an individual student, and we can't simply stereotype them into one type of learner or two types of learners. There's a broad spectrum, and that needs to be taken into account into our education system. So the real crisis here is that our teaching strategies are based on stereotypes that don't exist anymore. There's a broad spectrum of gender, there's a broad spectrum of races and sexual orientations and cultures that are not being taken into account. We are also basing our education system on old ideals. We live in a patriarchal society, and that kind of needs to move toward a more equal society. And in doing so, it allows boys and girls to have their own strengths and weaknesses, and it'll eliminate that idea that there's a crisis because girls are outperforming boys. And finally, there's no ownership in education. And it's very difficult to be passionate about something if you feel like you can't control it. If you add student interest and their ideas into their curriculums, they're going to be so much more passionate about what they're doing and so much more motivated to do their education. We're going to create learners who do the learning on their own.